I guess we can quickly start by talking about YCS Bologna, which is an event that I attended, and it is an event that I'm happy to say that I made top 8 at. I'm sure most of you have seen the coverage, so I'm not telling any crazy news here. I was able to make top 8 at YCS Bologna with K9 Vanquish Soul, a deck that I wasn't sure I was going to play until the Friday of the event. Basically, I was deciding between, I've talked about all of this in a little bit more detail in the deck profile, by the way, which if you haven't seen it yet, you can go !YouTube and subscribe to the YouTube channel, where I've already uploaded the deck profile like almost a week ago at this point, or more like 5 days ago, I think. But I was deciding between Pure Yummy and K9 Vanquish Soul. Pure Yummy being a deck that I've been practicing for a while now. It's actually funny, I'm just now realizing that the two decks I was basically caught up between were the two decks that ended up playing in the finals, which is funny. I mean, I'm happy to say that I think this time around my analysis, or our analysis within my team Raid and Trade, I think was pretty spot on. I think we kind of nailed it when it came to like the kind of decks that people were gonna play and which kind of decks were gonna be solid options against those. Because of course, following the events of YCS, what was it, Pittsburgh, the week before, it was kind of obvious that there was going to be a lot of people playing Draco Tail at this YCS. There's two things that I expected people, or rather, there's three things that I expected people to do after YCS Pittsburgh. And I think properly analyzing and properly predicting meta development like this is a very important thing to do, and I guess I'll talk a little bit about the thought process that goes into it now. But basically, after Draco Tail did so well at YCS Pittsburgh, there was I guess three main things that people would be doing. The number one thing, which is the obvious one, I suppose, is play Draco Tail, because it was, well, the best deck the week before. You know, like a lot of people, I think, were just playing Draco Tail because the deck is really solid. I told you this in the streams before this YCS as well. I was considering to just play Draco Tail for a decent period of time before this YCS. Like, Draco Tail was an option for me, and seeing it perform so well at YCS Pittsburgh, you know, I was like, okay, maybe Draco Tail is the thing, right? Maybe I should be playing Draco Tail. The second thing that people could be doing when it comes to expecting Draco Tail to be the best deck in the format is play decks that beat Draco Tail. Which, you know, I don't believe there's many decks that really farm Draco Tail, but one thing that was for sure is that people were going to play decks more targeted at Draco Tail. Like, for example, I think decks that fall, I mean, the deck that I ended up playing, K9 Vanquish Soul, is a deck that falls into that category. K9 Vanquish Soul has probably the best matchup in the format against Draco Tail, which is why I played it ultimately. But there's other decks that also kind of fall into that category. Like, for example, I think that is one of the reasons why Malice is a relatively successful deck at this YCS, because Malice has very good non-engine against Draco Tail, because it gets to play Dominus Impulse, which is a really good card against Draco Tail, and it has a very strong engine that is very hard for Draco Tail interruptions to stop. So Malice was another deck that, like, and also Draco Tail is a deck that does not apply as much pressure as other decks in the format, and that's something that I think Malice benefits from. However, I'm of course not the biggest fan of Malice, and I also thought Malice had too many other weaknesses, including consistency, as well as Molcharmies, which made me not want to play the deck, as well as Nibiru, which a lot of Draco Tail decks were playing. And then the third option, the third thing that you can do, is you can try to be one step ahead of the competition. And what I mean by this is you would try to play a deck that is not only okay against Draco Tail, but most importantly, it is good against the decks that people play because they expect a lot of people to counter Draco Tail. And what I mean by this is you play a deck that does well into the K9 decks and the Malice decks, which is what people are playing because Draco Tail it has a target on its back, basically, right? You understand what I'm saying? And that deck, in my opinion, for this YCS was yummy, pure yummy. I think pure yummy was a great call to have a deck that was decent into Draco Tail, because the yummy versus Draco Tail matchup is pretty close to 50-50, but there's a lot of gameplay involved between those two decks because they are both relatively mid-range in terms of their end boards. So honestly, I think you can just kind of like solve that matchup by playing it better than your opponent. Like if you play pure yummy against pure Draco Tail, I think is a pretty skill intense matchup. And so like but it's not a counter to Draco Tail. Like yummy is just okay against Draco Tail at best. Like it's like about 50-50. And if you pick your non-engine accordingly, then it might be a little bit better for yummy. But what I believe yummy was a good call into was other decks that people played to beat Draco Tail, mostly Malice and K9 stuff, because yummy doesn't really play into Izuna if you don't, unless you don't have to activate Marshmallow, so you can just play around Izuna that way, and you just have a lot of non-engine space, a lot of hand trap at your disposal to beat Malice and K9, including stuff like Dominus Purge, which also doesn't activate your opponent's Izuna. You can play Imperm and stuff like that. And so I felt like yummy was a very solid option for this format because it has a very balanced matchup spread, but it is ahead against some of the more outrageous combo decks in the format. If one thing you'll notice when I'm talking about it like this is that basically Mitsurugi, or more like Yummy Mitsurugi, wasn't really an option for me because I felt like Yummy Mitsurugi, while being, I think, on paper the deck with the like craziest end board, maybe next to Malice, I just felt like I don't think Mitsurugi Yummy is very well positioned in the current format, is what I should say, because I just feel like it does none of the things that you want super well, right? It's not particularly good at going second. It's not particularly good at going first either, because it's like kind of weak against every kind of non-engine that people do. Like it does play through low impact hand traps relatively well, except when it doesn't, because sometimes you just draw one Mitsu starter or one Yummy starter and you don't really draw the great bridges, you just draw like the random engine requirements. So like some hands are pretty vulnerable, and then the high engine hands end up like basically, which is completely out of your control because it's very high variance in that sense. You either draw like one engine and four non-engine, or some engine requirements, which is like a fine hand against like the high impact hand traps like Droll and Fuba or whatever, or you draw full engine, which plays through low impact hand traps like it's nothing, but then your opponent drops one Charmy on you and suddenly your hand sucks ass, or Droll. And so I didn't really like that aspect of Yamimitsu. I felt like it was a high variance deck for no reason in the current format. How do you feel about Ash this format aside from Charmies? Ash is very mediocre outside of Charmies. However, Charmies are so important that you're basically always going to play Ash Blossom, is the unfortunate news. Unless you play a deck that doesn't care about Charmies. If you have a deck that doesn't care about Charmies, you can definitely cut Ash Blossom. And you probably should, depending on... I mean, it depends on what your approach is. If you're trying to use a lot of low impact hand traps, then Ash is good. But for the most part, Ash Blossom, very underwhelming, going second right now. Like most decks will still put up very, very strong boards very consistently if the only non-engine you have going second is Ash Blossom. It's like... Ash Blossom is very good going first to counter Charmies or to have as a backup for your board. It's also good going second if you manage to pair it with other things. But it's pretty mediocre. Otherwise, but yeah. I mean, the format moving forward, I guess, is interesting. I'm very happy with my deck choice for this event, but it's not like the deck that I played, K9 Vanquish Soul, is like a deck without weaknesses. Like, for example, this deck is relatively easy to board break. I'll say it. Like, it was for this event. I really liked the list and all the choices, but like, you activate, I think, one evenly matched against this deck, and it's already in a pretty tough spot. Or stuff like Dark Ruler is really good against it. Of course, post side deck, you can set up the Vanquish Soul Trap and the K9 Quick Play spell to kind of play around Dark Ruler. But stuff like Evenly Matched, that straight up just like removes the entire board, is pretty crazy. So yeah. Raisin is going to be banned. Like this, and that's the unfortunate part about this deck in particular. And I cannot emphasize this enough. The Vanquish Soul stuff, the Vanquish Soul part of this deck is giga mediocre. The Vanquish Soul cards in this deck, it barely feels like a Vanquish Soul deck. Let me tell you that much. Like the difference in terms of how this deck plays to the deck that I played at the European Championship is like night and day. Like I topped Euros with pure Vanquish Soul with Pot of Extravagance and stuff like that. That deck was like way more mid-rangey and awesome, and this deck is just basically a K9 combo pile. Like this, and I played this deck, but I mean that in a kind of a negative way, because you guys know I'm not a huge fan of the K9 cards. Like the gameplay that the K9 cards provide for this deck, like I'm not the biggest fan of it. Like I played a combo deck at this YCS because I thought it was the best choice, and I like the Vanquish Soul cards in theory. Like, you know, it still is ultimately overall a relatively enjoyable deck to play yourself. Playing against it, in my opinion, is kind of the K9 cards, but it's just very high ceiling stuff, you know, which is it's subjective. Some people like this, some people don't. Typically, I like to play the more fair, low to the ground stuff, like the more mid-rangey, grindy decks. This deck is not that anymore. Vanquish Soul used to be that at Euros, but right now it's not. It just turns out that it just turns out that K9 pure is not strong enough. You know, pure K9 just isn't strong enough to actually go first and, like, you know, play through hand traps and then make a board that wins. I mean, sometimes it is, but usually it's not. And so pairing it with something else that just gives you that little bit over the top, that little bit extra power, also consistency, because you basically, not only does Vanquish Soul give this deck more level 5s to more consistently pull off your Jokul stuff, but also it gives you a second line of play that's available to you, right? Like, you basically have more starters to get into the game than if you were playing pure K9, because in pure K9 you only have a limited amount of starters. If you add Mad Love, Holy Sue, Raisin, Stake Your Soul, Rhoda to that list, your deck is more consistent. Because not every single game do you have to do both things. You don't always have to do Vanquish Soul or K9 to win a game. There are a lot of games that I won just doing K9 things. And there are a few games, less, but there are very few games where I won just doing Vanquish Soul things. So yeah, basically this deck is like basically the K9 part is very strong. The Vanquish Soul part is rather weak, but still together they still equal more than the sum of its parts here, and that's what makes this deck kind of like work. Yeah. Charmy's over Droll. Yes, I essentially, the way I experienced this format in testing, I felt like the only consistent way to beat high ceiling decks going second was Charmies. And the reason why I felt like that was because the Charmies are the only thing that you can play in a sufficient quantity. Basically, you cannot play if there was more cards that did the same thing as Droll and Lockbird, which thank God there aren't more cards like Droll and Lockbird, but like, it's just not a reliable strategy. If it's like, and I didn't like pairing like 6 or 9 Charmies with Droll. That's something that I've done in the past, and I just hated that. I hated that because I would basically, the Droll Lockbird would have the biggest anti-synergy possible with some of the best cards in my deck. And I just didn't like that at all. And I think the important part about Charmies in this deck and in this format is like, most decks have very solid plan Bs under Charmies. Under any individual Charmy, like a Mitsurugi deck or whatever, they will have a very solid plan if they get hit with Fuva or Perulia or Meows. And the same is true for Malice, the same is true for Yamimitsu, whatever. Like, most of those decks have very, very solid plans under the Charmies. The problem is that that completely falls apart if you have a second Charmy, a different one from the first one. Like, if you ever open two Charmies, or the first Charmy draws you into a different Charmy, it becomes super awkward for the opponent to really do anything. And that means that the Charmies become more powerful the more you play. Right? Like, if a Perulia is already good, but a Perulia that draws you a Fuva or a Perulia that draws you a Meowls is completely insane. And that's why I really wanted to play all 9. That is why I wanted to play all 9 Charmies. And it worked out great. I felt like I was having very little issues post side going second. You know, I lost a couple of game 1s over the course of the weekend, but I was able to pull back in game 3 a lot of the times. But yeah. Droll seems very strong now because of the VS comeback. So here's the thing. Droll and Lockbird is decent against Vanquish Soul. At the same time, I would argue Droll and Lockbird is a lot weaker against this deck than it is against, for example, Yami Mitsurugi. Because this deck essentially has, let's say, 7 immediate outs to Droll and Lockbird. Because, I mean, you obviously have Called by the Grave, but you also have K9 Noroi, which 95% of the time when I opened K9 Noroi, I would just summon Noroi, summon a level 5 from the deck, overlay into Ripper immediately. So I can negate Droll and Lockbird without searching beforehand. And Jokol is basically the same thing. I mean, Jokol, you need to draw a level 5 with Jokol, but the deck has so many level 5s that usually if you open Jokol, you will beat Droll and Lockbird. And so this deck is not as weak to Droll and Lockbird as you might think. Against this deck, let me tell you one thing. Molcharmy Perulia, if you're looking for a high impact hand trap, Molcharmy Perulia is the one against this deck. Molcharmy Perulia is insane against K9. And I was hit with very, very few Perulias over the course of the weekend because people weren't really respecting this deck enough, in my opinion. People were like, oh, Perulia is not great against Dracotail, so I'm not going to main deck it. And against other decks like Yamimitsu or Malice or whatever, I would prefer a different hand trap in the side deck like Lancia or Droll or whatever. And so I got hit with very, very, very few Perulias, which was nice. And I think that is something that is going to change. I think that is going to change in the format moving forward. I mean, it's hard to predict what exactly is going to happen. And also, there's a couple of things that are happening soon-ish that will have the potential to somewhat change the format. Like, for example, there is Phantom Revenge coming out, which I arguably, okay, doesn't change as much. But then also, there is potentially a Forbidden and Limited list on the table, right? Like, it should be happening at some point in December or January. And that might shake up the format a little bit, but we have no idea. Is that with Spenta? No, Spenta is in the next main set. Spenta is in, what's it called? Burst Protocol. Burst Protocol has Spenta. And Burst Protocol is early February. Yeah. What were the siding patterns, especially if you side 6 Molcharmy and Nib? Oh yeah, I can talk about that. I saw a lot of people ask this. Essentially, the way I cite going second in this deck is gonna seem criminal to you. It's gonna seem absolutely criminal. But basically, going second, I took out insane amounts of engines, unhealthy amount of engines. But I think it's fine because I'm side decking. I have 9 Charmies post side. So the way I look at it, most of the time, I basically play a 31 card deck because most Charmies will give me at least 1 draw, but usually more. So the 9 Charmies will just cycle into either more Charmies or more engine. So I don't have to necessarily open a bunch of engine or any if I have Charmies. So what I would usually side out going second was 1 Madlove, 1 Jiaolong, Heavy Burger, 1 or 2 Jokul, always 2 Norois, because it's very easy for the opponent to play around Noroi by committing a bunch of set cards. So I didn't want to have Noroi as my starter. Some matchups I take out Shifter, some matchups I take out Bell, some matchups I take out Bestials. Against Draco Tail, I take out some spell starters, like I literally side out Stake Your Soul. I side out Rhoda, I side out Case for K9 almost every time, one of them. And I side out the K9 quick play spell in most matchups going second. So those are all the cards I would sometimes side out. Usually not all of them together, but that's like 10 or 11 options I think I just mentioned, or 12. And that's what I would, for example, against Malice, I would side out all of the things I just mentioned, except for Bell, for like 12 more hand traps. But yeah, after siding, this deck has like barely any starters, which is why I think if this becomes the norm, once again, this is where meta development comes in. Against this deck, legitimately, I think sometimes if you expect people to do this, you should just send them first post siding. Like unironically, if you think your opponent is doing this, just send them first, bro. It's better for you. Like one of my opponents did that. It was my opponent from top 8. We played in Swiss already. I think it was like round 13. Yeah, we played round 13, and they sent me first in game 3. I won game 2. They sent me first in game 3, and then I didn't open a play. I still ended up winning. Because I just held my Charmies for their turn, and we got into like a grind game, and I ended up winning it. But yeah. Banlist prediction? Oh, it's a tough one. I'd have to think about it. We'll probably... Those are some of the things we'll talk about throughout the next couple of weeks, you know, in December. I have a lot of that sort of stuff planned. We're going to be talking about a lot of those things. But I have to think about it. What exactly? I mean, I know that there's a few things that I would like to happen, but I just think they are not going to happen at right now. Like, for example, this is my subjective opinion, is that the cards that made Vanquish Soul problematic are the K9 cards. So I would really like to see a very harsh hit on the K9 cards and then revert some of the Vanquish Soul hits. I know that's not gonna happen. They don't want to ruin the K9 archetype too early. It's still getting support and all that. I understand that. So it's not like it's not a prediction. It's just something that I would like to see, but I know it's not gonna happen. Realistically, they're probably just gonna give K9 like a small tap on the wrist because it's still getting more support. But I do think K9 as an engine has basically proven that it is very, very powerful. I mean, there's 3 out of the 8 decks here in top 8 are K9 decks, right? There's 2 K9 Vanquish Soul and a K9 Mitsurugi, making K9 essentially the most popular engine in top 8 here, right? There's 2 Yami decks between Pure Yami and Pure Mitsu. There's 1 Draco Tail deck, but there's 3 K9 decks. So I think K9 needs to be talked about when we're looking at ban list hits. The one thing that I really hope they don't do is hit Izuna. I don't want them to hit Izuna. I think Izuna is the exception because it's the most enjoyable K9 card to play with. I think that card's pretty cool. So I think the ones we're looking at are like Jokul or Noroi, I guess. But I once again, I don't expect them to put like a really big hit on K9. What do you think about 2 Lupus in the deck? I saw that Pierre did that. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I personally didn't really consider playing a second Lupus ever in my testing. I'm not 100% sure why we did that. I guess sometimes drawing Lupus alone is not bad, because like making Typhon is actually quite good going second. So I don't hate it, but I'm not sure if it's that important. To avoid Sting. See, that I don't think is an issue. I think the Draco Tail matchup is so good that I don't think you care if your Lupus gets stinged. Yeah. I'm not entirely sure why. There's 2 Lupus. I haven't seen the deck profile. It enables Holy Sue plus Lupus when you don't have the attribute for Holy. That is fair. You know, there's a couple of instances where you might be able to have Lupus plus Holy Sue or whatever. Also, Lupus Heart Draw is pretty good against Bell. Like even if you or Ash, right? Like let's say you have Izuna plus Lupus, you can go Izuna, your opponent might Ash it, your opponent might Droplet it, your opponent might do whatever, and then you just have the Lupus in your hand anyways, and I think that's decent. So yeah, he said it was because Typhon into Zeus was sufficient against Draco Tail and Mitsu. Against Draco Tail I can see it. Against Draco Tail I agree. Because against Draco Tail, but like the thing is, against Draco Tail the matchup is already insane, so I don't think it's necessary. Against Malice, against Mitsuyami, I don't really agree. I think against Mitsuyami the Lupus should only be enough if your opponent is throwing. It shouldn't be enough on its own. It should help, but it's not like, yeah. Do you want Draco Tail hits? Me personally, no. I thoroughly enjoy Draco Tail being part of the format, if you ask me. Like I personally think Draco Tail is the kind of deck that is powerful, so I wouldn't be surprised if they do hit it. But ultimately, like the way I feel about it is, if this is the type of deck that is considered one of the best decks in the format, I think Yu-Gi-Oh is doing pretty well. Like that, but that is subjective. I'm 100% aware that that is a subjective statement. But I personally enjoy Draco Tail a lot, both playing it and playing against it. I think this deck is pretty wholesome as like all things considered. I enjoy playing against it. I enjoy taking parts in formats where this deck is being played. So if they want to hit Draco Tail, personally, I think I would like to see a very, very, very small hit. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I'm being subjective here. I'm basically saying like I think the gameplay that this deck provides is healthy, so it shouldn't be hit. And to be fair, this is the case. Like the format in general, you know, there's a couple of decks that are doing a little bit too much, but overall, I'm having a much better time playing Yu-Gi-Oh at the moment. Like it's been pretty good across this weekend. Like even some of the games or matches that I lost were pretty enjoyable. It's just I guess it's unfortunate that my top 8 match doesn't fall into that category, because there's a bunch. There's like 2 high ceiling decks going against each other is basically where the problem starts, I suppose, is when like a K9 combo deck goes up against another K9 combo deck, or Yami Mitsurugi goes up against the K9 combo deck. But that is just, once again, also subjective. That is because I don't enjoy combo versus combo gameplay. So that is, I guess, where my enjoyment of the current format is kind of lacking. But yeah, I mean, overall, I think the format is pretty good still, all things considered. Do you expect any Malice hits? Yes. I think it would be kind of stupid to not do more Malice hits, because I think, I mean, it's been like, Malice is the oldest deck here in top 8 basically, and it still is the most represented alongside Vanquish Soul in top 8, right? Like the Malice cards at this point have been around for a year, and they still put up like the best numbers essentially, even though they haven't won. I still think yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't have to tell you that I would. You know I would.